The rain had just stopped. The soil along the banks of the Ganga was wet, and far away in the darkness, the light of torches was trembling with the wind. Slow hoofbeats could be heard, as if an army was silently moving forward through the night. But this was not the beginning of a war. This was the beginning of the changing of an era. Because in history, some empires do not fall by the sword. They first break from within. And Bengal, at that time, was slowly breaking apart. There was once a time when this land of eastern India was under the influence of the Pala dynasty. Massive Buddhist monasteries, students arriving from distant lands, and a tradition of knowledge that had made this region famous across the world. But within every great power comes a moment when its own strength becomes its burden. The Pala Empire had now grown old. The administration had started weakening. Control over the borders was loosening. Local feudatories had begun increasing their own power. And Bengal, which was once under a strong central authority, was now slowly getting divided into smaller fragments. People in the villages had now started paying taxes to two different rulers. The danger of bandits on trade routes was increasing, and the soldiers who once fought together under the command of the Pala emperors were now seen standing under different banners. But history never leaves an empty space. Where power weakens, a new force is born. And in the middle of that chaos, a new name was slowly rising, Sena Dynasty. But this was not the kind of story where a king suddenly arrived with thousands of soldiers and built an empire overnight. No, the beginning of the Sena Dynasty was very slow. So slow that perhaps at that time nobody even noticed that in the coming years, this very family would change the future of all Bengal. This story begins with Samantasena. History does not give many details about him, but sometimes even limited information says a lot. It meant that he had emerged during a time when simply surviving itself was the greatest achievement. At that time, Bengal was like a battlefield. Small regional rulers were constantly trying to expand their borders. Every fort was fighting for itself. Every feudatory was increasing his army. And in this atmosphere, Samantasena laid the political foundation of his family. He was not a great conqueror, but he had understood that the world of the Palas was ending, and the one who recognizes changing times before everyone else. History often belongs to him. Slowly, the Sena family began becoming part of local politics. Small alliances were formed. Military support was gathered. And then power passed into the hands of Hemantasena. The period of Hemantasena was not just a period of rule. It was a period of preparation. He understood that in Bengal, simply surviving would not be enough. If power had to be achieved, then the other forces would have to be pushed aside. At that time, there was no single supreme power in eastern India. Small rulers were fighting against one another. Somewhere there were conflicts over borders, somewhere over trade routes. And in the middle of this chaos, the Sena family was slowly increasing both its army and influence. But they were still not the masters of Bengal. The real player had yet to enter the stage. And then history witnessed the arrival of the name that transformed the Sena dynasty from a family into an empire, Vijayasena. With his reign, the politics of Bengal began to change. Vijayasena was not just a king, he was a strategist. He understood that if Bengal had to be controlled, then the smaller rulers would have to be eliminated. And then began a long campaign. The movement of armies along the rivers started increasing. Small forts began facing attacks. Many local rulers surrendered without war, but many chose to fight. And with every victory, the borders of the Sena dynasty kept expanding. One by one, the regional powers of Bengal began falling before him. The rulers who had once taken advantage of Pala weakness to build their own authority were now unable to stand against the Sena dynasty. But this was not just war. Vijayasena had understood that an empire cannot survive by the sword alone. He strengthened the administration, created loyal feudatories, and established control over the trade routes through which Bengal's wealth flowed. Slowly, the markets started stabilizing. Merchants began receiving protection. The tax system in villages became organized once again. And for the first time, people began feeling that a central power was once again rising in Bengal. But the faster power rises, the faster its enemies also rise. Some regional rulers tried to form alliances against the Sena dynasty. Small conflicts along the borders continued constantly. But Vijayasena's greatest strength was his speed. He never allowed his enemies enough time to become strong together. And that became his greatest victory. Slowly, the Sena dynasty began to be counted among the most influential powers of eastern India. But while Bengal was changing, the rest of India was also changing at the same time. In northern India, Rajput powers were fighting among themselves. The signs of new invasions had started emerging from the west. In the south, large kingdoms were displaying their strength. The entire Indian subcontinent was divided among many powers. And in this fragmented world, Bengal was once again becoming a center of power. But the most dangerous time for an empire is not when it is weak. It is when it begins believing that it has become invincible. And that phase began during the reign of Ballalasena. If Vijayasena had conquered Bengal, then Ballalasena wanted to shape it. His court was filled with scholars, Brahmins, and the creation of a new social order. He tried to bind society into a fixed structure. The Varna system became more organized. Brahmins received special patronage. Sanskrit traditions received royal support. The sound of bells in temples began increasing. Religious rituals started taking place on a much larger scale. The cultural identity of Bengal was slowly changing. But every system comes with a price. As society became more structured, it also began becoming less flexible. Power started becoming concentrated at the top. And slowly, a distance began emerging within society. A danger that perhaps nobody at that time considered serious. But history often reveals the most dangerous threats at the very end. Even then, from the outside, the Sena Empire appeared to be moving toward its peak. The royal courts of the capital were filled with light. Trade routes were active. The army was organized. And Bengal once again began to be counted among the richest powers of eastern India. But at the same time, from the northwest, a new military storm was beginning to rise. A style of warfare that Indian kingdoms had never witnessed in this form before. Fast cavalry, sudden attacks, and armies moving forward with the speed of lightning. But Bengal was still unable to understand this coming danger. Because when an empire is passing through its most stable phase, history is often preparing its greatest turning point. And for the Sena dynasty, that turning point was now not very far away. But the real test of any empire does not come at the peak of its power. Its real test comes when the world is changing, and it does not even realize it. And the Sena Empire was now standing exactly at that moment. During the reign of Bengal appeared as stable from the outside, as it had become complex from within. The royal courts of the capital were filled with luxury. Grand rituals were taking place in temples. Sanskrit scholars were receiving patronage. Trade routes were active. Boats loaded with goods constantly moved through the waters of the Ganga. At first glance, it looked like a successful and prosperous empire. But the most dangerous thing about history is this: prosperity often convinces rulers that their era will last forever. And perhaps the Sena court had also begun believing the same. Lakshmanasena was not just a king, he had become the symbol of the system that his ancestors had built over decades. But that system had now slowly become rigid. The distance between social classes was increasing. Local feudatories had become more powerful. And most importantly, the army was no longer an army that constantly lived through warfare. Because empires that remain stable for too long often begin to forget the speed of war. Inside the royal court, discussions about tradition and order had now become more important than plans of expansion. Soldiers still existed, but they no longer carried the aggressive energy that had once made the most powerful ruler of Bengal. But far away from Bengal, in the direction of northern India, the world was changing rapidly. They were breaking old political structures apart. Many Rajput powers were locked in continuous conflict, and the new style of warfare coming from West and Central Asia had become an entirely different challenge for Indian kingdoms. This was not merely a clash of armies. It was a collision between two different military cultures. Indian armies usually fought in heavy formations, elephants, infantry, and massive battle lines. But the new Turkic-style armies depended on speed, light cavalry, sudden attacks, rapid retreats, and then sudden returns. The enemy was never given enough time to recover. And in the middle of this changing world, history witnessed the arrival of a name that would later be remembered as one of the most decisive turning points in Bengal's history. But his story did not begin like the story of a great emperor. He was not the prince of a massive empire. In the beginning, he was not even considered a major commander. But he possessed one thing: the ability to recognize a rapidly changing world. He had understood that the political structure of India was fragmented. Great kingdoms existed, but they remained disconnected from one another. And if someone attacked with speed, many powers could collapse before they even had time to react. Slowly, he began his campaigns toward Bihar. Small military detachments, fast horses, and sudden attacks. Many local powers failed to even understand his strategy, because this was not traditional warfare. This was warfare based on speed. And then his eyes turned toward a region that was once considered the symbol of knowledge across all of Asia. For centuries, Nalanda was not merely a university. It was an entire intellectual world. Students from distant lands came here. Thousands of manuscripts were preserved inside massive libraries. Monks spent their lives studying inside silent corridors. But now that world was no longer as strong as before. After the decline of the Buddhist institutions were no longer receiving the same level of protection. Political instability had weakened them. And now the politics of war had reached the world of knowledge itself. During the campaigns of Bakhtiyar Khalji, many Buddhist centers in Bihar suffered massive destruction. Nalanda too became part of that upheaval. Knowledge collected over centuries began disappearing in the middle of fire and violence. But this was not merely the fall of a university. It was the signal of the collapse of that old Eastern Indian world whose foundations had once been built during the age of the Palas. And now the next target was Bengal. But here, history must be understood very carefully. Many stories show that Bakhtiyar Khalji destroyed the entire Sena Empire in a single attack. But reality was far more complex than that. Yes, he delivered a deep shock to Sena authority. Yes, his speed-based strategy shook the central structure of Bengal. But the Sena dynasty did not disappear immediately. And that is what makes this story even more interesting. At that time was an important center of Sena power. It was morning. Markets were slowly opening. Temple bells were ringing. Boatmen along the banks of the Ganga were busy with their work. And then, far away, a cloud of dust could be seen rapidly moving toward the city. At first, perhaps nobody considered it a threat. But within moments, the sound of galloping horses began echoing across the entire region. The detachment had already begun advancing rapidly toward the capital. According to historians, the attack was so sudden that the Sena administration failed to organize a proper response. This was not a long siege war. It was a fast and psychological shock. Chaos spread inside the palace. Soldiers were summoned. The gates were closed. People began fleeing, and in the middle of that chaos was forced to retreat. But this is where the greatest historical mistake is often made. Many people end the story right here, as if the Sena Empire had ended at that very moment. But that was not entirely true. Lakshmanasena survived. The rulers of the managed to maintain their presence in some regions of eastern Bengal. Many local feudatories still remained loyal to them, and in several areas, Sena power survived for years afterward, which means Bakhtiyar Khalji succeeded in breaking the central authority of the Sena Empire. But he was unable to completely erase the entire dynasty immediately. And perhaps that is why historians still debate whether he truly succeeded in bringing all of Bengal permanently under his control. Because victory is not decided merely by reaching a capital city. Real victory comes when an entire region is brought under stable control. And in a vast and complex land like Bengal, that was never easy. But one thing was certain. After that attack, the political balance of eastern India changed forever. The Sena Empire was no longer the same. The old order had begun to collapse, and Bengal was entering a new age, where in the coming years, the direction of power, religion, and politics would completely transform. Many popular stories portray the sudden attack as the instant end of the, but many historians present a far more complex picture. Did not simply flee and accept defeat. Rather, after retreating toward eastern Bengal, he reorganized Sena power along with his sons and loyal feudatories. In several regions of Bengal, Sena forces continued resisting Turkic influence, making it difficult for Bakhtiyar Khalji to establish permanent control. His attack was undoubtedly fast and devastating, but he could not fully conquer all of Bengal. Even at the time of Bakhtiyar Khalji's death in 1205 CE, large parts of eastern Bengal still remained under Sena influence. That is why some historians do not see this conflict as merely a one-sided defeat, but rather as the story of a long resistance and a declining yet still fighting power. If you enjoyed this video, then make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments. Was the fall of the Sena Empire merely a military defeat? Or was it the beginning of the end of an entire era? And if you still haven't watched our previous video, where we explored the complete rise and fall of the, then make sure to watch that as well. We will meet again in the next episode with another chapter that changed the direction of Indian history forever.